Yeah, so let's start with brief introductions. If you all can share who you are and where you're at in the world. And then if you want to, only if you want to, maybe share what's lighting you up and giving you energy recently. And if there's any struggles or difficulties recently that you also want to share. So anyone can jump in and start, whoever wants to go first.
I can start. Hello, everyone. Hello, co-panelists. I am Kelly Limes Taylor, and I immediately forgot my prompts, but I think I forgot, I'm sorry. I know that we are talking about what is kind of lighting us up. And so I think that that's actually where I want to stay, because I could talk about kind of like facts about myself, but I don't know. If they're important, they'll come out during this conversation. But what's lighting me up, or you can look me up, Google me. I don't do that enough to myself, so maybe there's information out there too. But what's lighting me up really right now is really recognizing how every detail that surrounds me, kind of in my home, with the people that I live with, in my yard, all that kind of stuff, how everything is an amazing, just all of the microcosms. I don't know the plural of that word. It's just an S, right? Microcosm. Just all of the universes that are just here, like right around me all the time, every day. And just how much attention and how much I'm enjoying kind of attending to all of the kind of little worlds that are just floating around here. So that's what's really fun for me right now. And that's also challenging. So it's 2 for 1.
I guess I'll go next. Can everyone hear me? I'm also still recovering from COVID. So if I get out of breath, don't mind me. So what's been lighting me up? Well, hot baths have been lighting me up, honestly. Quite medicinal and relaxing. Watching my children and these little people and watching them evolve has been super magical in our SDE journey. And I think the other question was like, what's maybe like something that we're struggling through or something, right? Is that the other prompt? You know, my eldest turned 10, and I shared this in our village, that, I don't know, there's something about when the kids turn double digits that I thought I had shed, you know, certain schoolish beliefs, and they were dormant for many years. And then the double digits hit, and then all of a sudden these schoolish things like, oh my God, is my 10-year-old like reading and writing at a place where he's supposed to be writing, even though I intellectually know that that's all bullshit. But like, you know, I've been indoctrinated, right, for so long. And so even when you can go many years of, you know, I guess letting go, things happen in your life that can make you revisit those things. And so super thankful for our community. I mentioned the village. I'm founder of My Reflection Matters Village. It is a virtual co-learning community where we provide the supports, the conversations, and the healing for folks that are interested or navigating an SDE, or what I like to call intuitive-led learning. And we do that there, and we do it through multiple ways and memberships and all that. And it's free to join. But we also have a physical cooperative as well that I mentioned in other sessions too. So I'm happy to be here. And I'm Chime. I don't think I said that, but you can see it there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, both of you. I think for me, what's lighting me up and what's challenging me are probably very similar. And somebody asked me in the beginning of the year, Vivek, what is your vision for the year? And what came to me at that moment was to be more bold. And I think the reason that came to me is, you know, I'm a parent educator. I share non-coercive collaborative parenting ideas, and I work with a whole lot of parents, helping them have deeper relationships with their kids. And I think for me, you know, a lot of the time when I post things about child liberation and respecting kids as equals, I get so much pushback, and that it makes me afraid sometimes to speak my truth. And so being bold on the one hand is what lights me up, because I'm like, I want to speak my truth even more. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, but still I find that, like you were saying, Chemea, that the layers are there, right? I feel like, oh yeah, I'm bold. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not, I'd like to be more bold. You know, that's why I said more bold and not bold. And because, you know, like when I reflect on my own childhood, you know, being, I grew up, my family's from India, so I grew up in a very kind of traditional mindset, being punished and hit a lot. I think I was 6 years old the first time I ran away from home. I was like, this is not how human beings should be treated. I'm out, you know. And 10 years old, being hit in public by my dad, and running away, and going off hitchhiking at 10 years old, and finally making my way home. And all throughout my childhood and all throughout my teen years, I would watch adults and the way that they would talk to kids, and I'd be like, why are you doing that? That doesn't make any sense. That's so disrespectful and so demeaning. And I swore I would never become an adult who treated kids like that. That was like one of my main goals in life, was not to become an adult who treated kids like that, you know. And so that's why now I devote myself to helping parents find ways to work with their kids in such a way that they're not doing those same things to them, and still have powerful, loving, connected relationships with them. And the other side of what I do is that back in my, I'm 53 years old now. Back in my 20s, my early 20s, I had what I call my social justice awakening, where I suddenly saw the systems that I had been completely oblivious to prior to that, and saw my own prejudices and biases that I had been, you know, very unaware of before that. And it sent me on a multi-decade experience of deprogramming and reprogramming myself, you know, and to this day, I'm still learning every day. And so social justice activism and child liberation have always been things that are very important to me. And when my kid came along, I very much combined the two of those things. Born in 1997, there was no Facebook or anything for me to find like-minded community, which I'm so grateful for now. But back then, it was my partner and I, we were kind of all alone, and we didn't want to. My family's from India. My wife is Black from Trinidad, and so both of us have a lot of oppression in our family lines, and we did not want to be oppressors for our kids and continue that. So we realized we had to change our lens from a oppressor lens to a empowerment lens. And this is one of the things that we really focused on: is, am I empowering or oppressing? Am I supporting their knowledge, their self-knowledge and self-relationship, or am I imposing my values? Am I respecting their autonomy, or am I violating their consent? Am I controlling, or am I collaborating? And we would always ask these questions. Even to this day, she's 25. Even to this day, I ask those questions, because as parents, we have systemic power, and I didn't want that systemic power to be controlling my kids. So letting go of that power is hard, because it's so convenient, first of all. And then on top of that, I have so many layers of pain and trauma in my own past, and in my family, and in my culture. So doing the decolonizing and work, and to parent from a perspective of not oppressing but empowering, was a powerful thing. And now my kid's 25, and we're best friends, and we stay up late into the night talking about life. And fortunately, I now have the opportunity to share these same principles with hundreds of parents and families all around the world. Somebody was mentioning how important it is to be aware of different cultures and their experiences in the previous section. And so now I get a chance to work with people from all different cultures and all different family dynamics, working to liberate their kids. And of course, as we liberate our kids, we liberate ourselves too. So that's kind of the work that I do, that combination of parenting and social justice, and it's really meaningful to me. And I'm really very grateful to be here with so many wise people. I've learned so much this weekend and feel like I've grown so much already. So thank you.
Vivek, you already touched on so many intersections, but I want to talk a little bit about the connection between self-directed education or unschooling, whatever term feels right to you, and social justice. I'm wondering what connections exist for you all and what feels most present in those intersections for you.
I guess I'll hop in. So for me, I think one of the things, well, first, we know that SDE is, is a political, choosing the path of SDE is a political act. And I think one of the things that I've struggled in predominantly white middle class SDE spaces is that they're okay with challenging the system of schooling, but they're not okay, right? They want to be neutral when it comes to other systems of oppression in our country. And so for me, I can't separate the two, right? And from what I'm hearing from our SDE weekend, from what I've learned in my own intuitive-led learning journey, is that many of us have found ourselves here because of many of the oppressions that we've experienced in, whether it was in the system of schooling or in other systems, right? So yeah, for me, like it's naturally intersectional. Like you got to unpack and decolonize all of the things, all of the isms. You have to be willing. It doesn't mean that we're forcing children to go out and protest, right? But that we create an environment and a space where those kinds of conversations around injustices of different marginalized groups, and not just people, animals, right? The nature. We create a space that we can openly have those conversations, explore them. Kids can feel safe to have these, conversations with the adults in their space. And then I would also add that if you find yourself in an SDE space or a facilitator in that space or a leader in that space, that if there isn't a direct and very explicit acknowledgement that SDE in itself is indigenous, right? It's ancestral. It isn't a new thing. Even if it might feel new for us, it really is a returning back to the ways in which all of our ancestors, wherever we come from, practiced learning in their communities with children and with adults. So I think that's really important that we do that in our spaces.
I agree. I like what you said about children feeling safe to talk about these challenging topics with the adults in their lives. And I think, when I think about the reflection of more widespread oppression on a larger scale and how it reflects in our homes, I think that there's a macro micro connection that we can make there. That approaching kids from the perspective of hierarchical power dynamics from the very beginning puts that into their nervous system, puts that aware. This is how humans interact. Oh, this is how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be engaged in oppressive, hierarchical, violent power systems. This is what this is just home. It's just natural, right? My goodness, to unwire those things from my nervous system has taken, and I mean unwiring because it's still in the present. Unwiring those things from my nervous system has been a huge part of my journey. And so changing oppressive, coercive, violent systems to empowering, collaborative, and safe ones is a huge thing. And if we're replicating those systems in our homes, it's hard for us then to see that change happen outside our homes. I think we're definitely creating the future with how we treat our kids and the mindset that they absorb. So much of our perspective comes from the lens that is imposed upon us in our formative years. And being aware that we're programming our kids' nervous system and their neural pathways and their perspective and their lens with every interaction, I think is so important. So that when our kids feel in their nervous system what it feels like to be respected, what it feels like to be treated with respect, with dignity, to what it feels like, and when it feels like not to, they have a very clear sense of where they need to stand up for themselves, where they need to set boundaries, and that feeling is in the body as much as it is intellectual, you know, and it's that body-mind connection. I think that's so important. So for me, the power structures and systems, making sure I'm not replicating the oppressive ones in my homes, respecting autonomy and consent, which is one of the biggest things that oppressive systems do, is deny our autonomy, both our bodily autonomy, our autonomy of our mind and how we think, how we express ourselves. You know, different cultures express themselves very differently. How we see the world and the very way the world operates. You know, the spirituality of different cultures and all of this stuff. Colonialism and oppressive systems depress all of these things, repress all of these things, and they destroy our sense of our spirit, our sense of ourselves. And this is how oppression gets its control, you know, by destroying us. So by liberating our kids, and with thinking of liberating the larger systems, a lot of it is again, am I empowering them through these choices and through the way that I interact with them. So learning is certainly one of those places where autonomy is stifled and strangled. And I was looking for a breathing word. What's the breathing word like that? And suffocated and strangled, suffocated, and I forgot the third one. But anyways, but you know, like learning is such a primary thing that kids engage in from the moment they're born. They're taking in reams of information. We rarely see that incredible, intense process. And one of the things they're learning from us certainly is, you know, the essential way that we treat each other and what human interactions are about. So when I interact with kids, I'm like super focused on the model that I'm setting and thinking not only in this one interaction, but thinking globally at the same time. I've always got the micro and the macro in my head at the same time. And I think so there's a really clear connection between you know, the global harmony that I envision in some part of my consciousness that still has hope and can dream of us all coming together, and keeping that awareness that I'm replicating that and not replicating the oppressive systems that I certainly have grown up in the way I interact with kids. So I think that's how I see the interaction between those things, the overlap between those things, partially how it's going to create the world, and then the mindset that we're imposing on our kids from the early days, and making sure that we treat those things with integrity.
Okay, thank you, Vivek. Am I hearable, audible? Yeah, okay, good. This is such a big question, and I hope that I can kind of pull it all together well. And I do appreciate both of the perspectives that were already shared. Where I am at this point is that I have for a long time, and definitely understand and recognize the value of understanding the systems of which we're a part. I am speaking specifically in the context of the United States, because that's where that's where I'm speaking from. And so when I'm thinking about the United States, and I'm thinking about the systems that are the United States, that what essentially feels clear to me, what it feels like are, and what it is, I think, are institutions that are creating this thing, again, speaking in the US context, creating this thing called the United States that's not real and doesn't exist, and started in a bad way. And so a very bad way, right? That's the understatement of the I don't know, century, started off in a very bad way, right? And so when we look at all of our institutions, when we look at our legal institution, when we look at our political institutions, when we look at our prisons, when we look at schooling, obviously, when we look at religious institutions, if we want to throw it out there, economic, all of the systems, what they basically do is make the United States a thing. If I'm speaking in terms of the United States, but when we're speaking about any sort of colonizing power, what it makes is this supremacy a thing. It makes it real. We live in it. We deal with it as if it's a real thing, right? Because it's messing up our lives. And so we believe it's a real thing. We have history to stand on that it's a real thing. And this is, so what those of us who understand the pain, again, if we're speaking of the US empire in particular as a microcosm, if we want to go out into the history of Western colonialism, if we want to blow it broad like that, if we want to talk about how white supremacy is connected, if we want to get into the isms, if we want to get into it, we can get into it, but we've been getting into it in a variety of ways for the past 5 centuries, and that's the point. Like, we keep on looking and looking and looking and saying, you're hurting us, stop it, you're hurting us. This is how we need to change this part of you. This is how, and for those of us that are from groups, and that's most of us to some extent or another, that have been particularly physically oppressed, like could not find their physical freedom or find their legal freedom in this place. Of course, we're going to beat against this thing with all of our might, right? Now that we find ourselves in a place in history where not only do many of us enjoy a lot of physical freedom, right? But we're sitting here watching the end of the thing. Like, we are watching, in my opinion, I opine that we're watching the end of Western colonialism. And so we can talk about that if we want, but what's the point? So if we're watching the end of it, then, or even if we're not watching the end of it, the point is that we're watching it. And we're watching it while we are absolutely free as human beings to go and do something else. We are all free to go and do something else. And the thing that we can do, I think, is start thinking about, okay, I can say that I want the end of oppression. I can say that I want the end of white supremacy. I can say that I want the end of ableism. I can say I want the end of, that's great, great. But since we don't go into a store and say, I do not want chips and I do not want pizza, I do not, what do we want? What do we want? Stop looking, not stop looking, right? Because sometimes we gotta look, but in our free time, let's stop looking at what it is that we want changed and turn and think, what do I want though? We can talk about decolonial, fine. We can talk about anti-colonial, because I'll even go there. That's great, but what do we want? And I think that part of a lot of these discussions that we're having is ignoring the what do we want? Like, we can get really busy and have a good time and get into some really, you can write some books, you can go to some, well, I was going to say conferences, not meaning this conference, but I've been to other conferences where we spend a lot of time talking about what's wrong and not and analyzing it and turning around and upside down. But I think that saves us a little bit from the discomfort and the pressure and the pure difficulty of really working out what the new thing is. We need a new thing. Okay, yes, racism is wrong. Got it. So what do we want to be? Not racist, yeah, but what does that mean? How do you want to show up in the world where race isn't a thing? And not race isn't a thing as in like, I don't see the color. It's like, yeah, race, like, I see the color of your skin. I understand the dynamics. And I want all of us to think in an absolutely different way than this. So what does that look like? And really, when it comes down to each one of us, because it took a whole lot of people doing a whole lot of messy stuff for a whole lot of years to get to where we are. So it's not going to all be solved by a particular person. But when those of us that are interested in these questions turn away from throwing stones at what we don't like, and toward the question of what it is that we want. What we really get to, I think, is having to sit with ourselves. Like, I can't yell at those people anymore, because I got to figure out me, this being, what do I want in a world that is not going to box me in, right? But where I don't get to lean on those boxes myself either. I gotta think, I gotta get quiet in a room where there's no one to yell at, there's no one to argue with on social media, there's no distractions. There's not even the distraction of oppression, which is just a distraction. If I believe I'm free, I don't need to argue with anyone. I'm free. So then what comes next? What comes next? And the only way that I understand what comes next is when I sit with myself and get what's right in my, like Jermaine's saying, in my intuition. Like, I got to get deep in there and get to what's right, not for me as a person in this body, but I got to get right for like what is in the me that no one else can see, that is different from the entire universe, where it'll take the real bravery to be my real self, away from all of the labels and into a new world. Social justice to me then is nothing external and everything internal. Everything internal. Everything internal, right? Because some thunder here. Sorry, I don't know if y'all heard that, but that's disturbing or fun. I don't know. But when it's everything internal, and it's internal because anybody that has ever dealt with another human being ever understands that you can't make anyone think anything. You cannot make anyone change their minds. You can't make another human a human being do a single thing. You can't. It's gonna have to come from inside, and everything has to come from inside. So when we want to say that we want to change the world, we want to see a different world, I think that not primarily only, the only change that you can do is dig deep down inside, pull that stuff apart, and start living into what it is that you want to see. And when we do that, all of us, and I don't mean in a cliche way, because this is hard. Like, it's hard work, it's just internal, right? It's not hard work helping everybody else, it's hard work getting yourself right. And once we are able to do that, we are going to see, I think, not only not the stuff that we don't want, but we're actually going to come up with good stuff. Just not, we're going to come up with good and beautiful and new things that never existed before, because every single new thing has never existed before, right? And so and the only way that the new things that have never existed before can come is not by looking around. It's by looking inside and pulling it out. And I think that SDE is particularly, or unschooling, however you want to call it, is particularly beneficial. Because it gives people at least the time to do that, at least the time to try, right? And when, as Chime mentioned, when we are talking about unschooling and SDE being an indigenous thing, being an ancestral thing, that's, well, I think partially that's because people understand that there's power when you know yourself. And if you don't give people the power to know themselves, and they can do what they want to you, right? Taking that right away from us is what facilitates colonization. And getting it back is, yeah, what's going to get rid of it. But more importantly, it's going to give us a lot better stuff if we are able to direct our focus in ourselves, right? And that's all. Thank you.
Kelly opened up so much there. So I want to take a minute and see Chime and Vivek, if you have anything, if that sparked anything for you.
Oh yeah, she like COVID jumped out of me. Like she sparked so much excitement. Oh gosh, where do I even go? So Kelly, when you were talking about everything I'm hearing you talk about is liberation, right? And I think, and it's also making me think how this is how we separate equity work from liberation work, right? Liberation work is a work that we're doing outside the system, right? Where we are, like you were saying, tuning into our intuition for guidance on what we are building and co-creating with our neighbors, our friends, and our family. And I think that, you know, sometimes people kind of, they convolute this language, right? Or these ideas or practices. And both things can happen at the same time and should happen simultaneously. Like, we need people doing equity work in the system because there are a lot of kids who are being hurt and damaged. And so we need folks on the ground that are trying to minimize the harm that the system was designed to create. And also we need folks outside of this ground, on this ground, to be able to be building from the ground up new ways of thinking and how we practice education. So yeah, I'm so excited to be on this panel and all the juiciness that's coming out of this conversation. So thanks for all of that, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. I feel equally fired up and excited by all of this. I love the focus on turning inwards. You know, I think that's something that happens on a moment to moment basis too, a micro moment to moment basis, because our kids are, if you have kids and if they're around you doing stuff, then there's so many opportunities for us to practice, because the old mindset is going to reassert itself so many times. As soon as they talk back in quotes, when they say no, when they don't do the things that we're expecting them to do. Somebody wasn't in the last session, I think somebody was saying that they didn't, I think it was Damari saying that when or somebody, I forget, somebody said that when their kid turned 10, this whole new series of programs and so, was that you? The whole new series of programs and stuff came up that didn't even know were there. So it really is a lifelong journey of unraveling that inner stuff, you know. And so I really in my work with parents, because I work with a whole lot of parents on a week-to-week basis, and working with parents on a week-to-week basis, it's different than when I write my articles, which are kind of like more broad, because I've written over 500 articles on non-coercive, collaborative, social justice minded parenting. But that's like really broad. But when I'm working with parents on a week-to-week basis, we're in the minutia of daily life, you know, the extra bowl of ice cream and the bedtime and toothbrushing and homework and cleaning up your dishes. And every single one of those moments is also an opportunity for us to demonstrate the mindset that we want to inhabit. Are we demonstrating with the ice cream? Are we demonstrating an oppressor mindset? With brushing teeth, are we demonstrating an oppressor mindset? Or are we working together? Are we collaborating? Are we on a horizontal playing field and not using our power hierarchically to control? So in some ways, you know, that inner work happens in a moment-to-moment basis. Because when my kid doesn't want to brush their teeth, immediately I think, well, I think they should brush their teeth. I mean, and I think it's important for kids to brush their teeth. I'm not saying it's not, but my thinking around it, and then the thinking has fear that comes to it, and then I tense, and then from that I immediately move towards coercion, and suddenly I'm playing into the systems around toothbrushing that I have spent my life fighting against. And you know, so I think that we can take that mindset from the macro and bring it into our micro moments. And I call it, one of my acronyms is SMABO, which stands for Small Moments Affect Big Ones. And a lot of the time we don't realize all of the patterns that we're creating in those small moments. And then when we want we have like a bigger moment and we don't understand why our kids are resisting us and that kind of stuff, we struggle with it. And we don't realize the iceberg of stuff that's behind it. You know, I talk about having iceberg consciousness. That when we have iceberg consciousness, we're consciously perceiving what's under the surface of behavior, under the surface of this moment? What are the emotional causes of this moment? What are the relational causes of this moment? What are the environmental causes of this moment? And then what are the broader social structures that have contributed to this, And then operating with our kids from that perspective to help liberate their own. I almost don't want to say liberate, because if we start this from the beginning, we're not really liberating in a sense. We're liberating because the liberation is pre-programmed. but like, as kids are all, like, when a kid is freshly born, fresh, they're preserving their liberty. Thank you. That's what I was thinking of. Thank you. Preserving, nourishing, and empowering. And so I think that's really really powerful and really important. For me, it's that daily work, the SMABO work of bringing in my awareness to the smaller and smaller and smaller moments. And then, of course, to myself. I just tweeted the other day, it's hard to love on our kids when we're hating on ourselves. And so then to turn that same lens of compassion, of understanding, of grace on ourselves, because we are going to make mistakes every day. There's no way around it. We're going to act out of alignment with our principles. I prefer saying act out of alignment rather than mistakes. But we're going to act out of alignment with our principles and our values on a daily basis. So to show ourselves that same grace, so we can stay on the path and get up every day and work again. I call it a daily grind because we really, it's a daily work. And my kid, like I keep saying, because I'm also kind of amazed by it myself. My kid's almost 25. I still go, I just feels like yesterday that I became a parent, and never have still felt like an adult, because adults are problematic. And so like even at this point, I'm still looking for, am I being hierarchical? Am I imposing power? Because as a 25-year-old, you're thinking, my patterns come up. Should they have a job? Should they have an apartment? Should they be thinking this way? Should they be doing that way? So yeah, so for me, that work is so important, and I don't want to impose those things on my kid. And I don't want to impose them on myself. And I'm also clearing out the limited, dehumanized impression of myself that I had from that. So doing that work in the SMABO way, in the small moments way, with our kids, builds those layers that expand out and create ripples. And I often say parents are ripple creators. So I think in many ways we are all ripple creators, and making conscious ripples is a game changer. So I feel like that's a really important thing for us, is to, number one, is to take that reprogramming, deprogramming, self decolonizing work, and take it into the small moments that we often think of are more challenging. So I think that's what I'll have to say about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why healing is liberation work, right? Like, I think someone said something in the chat, something about repair, but I can't remember the exact question. But it was making me think about, again, how much of this work, when we talk about the social justice element, I think a lot of times as adults, we think that's something that we're like putting onto kids, right? And an act of social activism is also, how are we engaging in our own healing, right? Because as adults, if we are going to preserve the freedom of our children that they are inherently born with, right? And that was taken away for a lot of us as children, then as adults, there's a lot of repairing, there's a lot of healing that we need to be able to connect back with our inner children, to be able to feel free and whole again, because we are, like Kelly was saying, we are free. Like, the idea that, people have imposed this idea that we aren't is just inherently not true. So yeah, I just thought it was really important to mention the healing part of it. I think that is, this work is more about us as adults than it is about our own kids. They know what they need. We just need to move out the way and provide them the supports that they need to do what they got to do.
Yeah, you definitely already touched on this and are getting deep into the self-work. It's also coming up in the chat. But that question you mentioned, Shimei, was asking you to speak to repair, how to begin the process of repair from your own traumas and the ones we have inflicted in moments of unconsciousness onto our children, and how that repair can exist in larger communities. So if anyone has more to add about repair, please jump in.
Can the question be repeated? Sorry.
Absolutely. Can you all speak to repair, how to begin that process of repair from our own traumas and the ones we have inflicted in moments of unconsciousness onto our children, and how that repair can live in larger communities?
I can talk a little bit to, oh, sorry, Shimei, do you want to go ahead? All right. I can talk a little bit about repairing with kids, because I think that's, that repair process is so powerful, and it's one of the things that creates deep resilience in a relationship. My kid and I never fight, but it's not that we don't disagree, and it's not that we don't get angry, but we never fight because we've learned effective ways to experience our emotions and work with them. So we don't actually fight, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a full range of human emotions. So for me, when I act out of alignment with my kid, it happens a lot less now that we're decades into the process, but especially in the first few years, as I was completely surprised by how emotionally triggering parenting was going to be. I used to say my ideology is clashing with my reality, and because I had no idea what it was gonna be like. So there were lots and lots and lots of opportunities to repair, to need repair with my kid. And so for me, one of the things for me is self-forgiveness and self-compassion as the first step, because I want to recognize the weight of everything, that is pressing down on me to make me create this way. My personal trauma and history, my family trauma and history, my cultural trauma and history, and then 10,000 years of global coercive history and hierarchical power structures. All of that is all here and here, right? And so for me to make different choices is hard. So first, I want to be really compassionate with myself and do some work on forgiveness for myself. Part of the reason for that is when I go to my kid to repair, I don't want to dump my shame on them and expect them to care for it for me. I want to hold that for myself. And myself doesn't mean myself. It can mean other support systems I have. It can mean friends. It can mean all sorts of ways of managing and working with my feelings. And then going to our kids, there's two things. An apology, one of my sayings is an apology is not a statement, it's a relational process. So recognizing that an apology is not like an admission of shame, but it's a recognition of the acting out of alignment, the harm that was caused. And what I say is what I wish I would have done is, so then I can also acknowledge how I wish I had done something different. And then sometimes a do-over can be really helpful. Can we do it again so I can respond in the way that I would like to have responded? So that a do-over with kids can be really helpful. And yeah, I just apologized to my kid yesterday. Yesterday she was telling me something about buying something online and how this place is using installments now, so you can pay installments. And I immediately went, installments? That sounds fishy. Maybe they're going to ask you for interest. And I immediately went negative, and I was like, oh fuck, I felt like my kid was expressing something, and I went negative. So then later on I went to her and I was like, kiddo, the other day, yesterday when you were telling me that thing, I noticed that I immediately contradicted you, and I felt like I really would have rather really heard what you said, because you know the internet better than me, and I was questioning you, and I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with me. And so she was like, but I mean, I've practiced that all throughout, and so she was like, you know what, Dad, I actually didn't feel it. I felt like you were helping me understand about the interest. and which I hadn't thought of before. And so like, even though I had a feeling that she would say that, I still wanted her to know how I felt and how I saw the moment, you know? And the fact is, I know it did have an impact on her because I could see the drop in her face. So like that sense of forgiving myself and then going to my kid and then apologizing and says, and what's that? My 10-year-old calls me in when I do that. He says, "Oh, you're not listening to me. Let's talk when you can hear me." That's great. I love when kids call us in or out. It's the best thing, you know. It's like I always express gratitude. One of the things I share also is called the gratitude response. And the gratitude response is where I respond with appreciation or gratitude or some kind of acknowledgement, regardless of what it is my kids do, whether it's traditionally thought of as bad or traditionally thought of as good. I want to see what is empowering in there, you know. And so I think for me, that that sense of wanting to acknowledge what I so first, to summarize, forgiving myself. Second, acknowledging what happened, acknowledging the impact that I saw. And then often, you know, like I could say, I felt like that might have hurt you, or I felt like that you might not have felt I trusted you in that moment. And then the kid often will respond with their experience. And then from acknowledging the impact, what I wish I had done instead, sometimes explaining why you did it can be helpful, but not in the "I'm sorry, but you wish you hadn't done this," or "If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have had to yell at you." Not that kind of explanation, but an explanation of, I felt like my trauma came up all of a sudden and I dumped it on you, kiddo, and you didn't deserve that. So that really understanding, kids can really understand what's happening. And then so once they understand, and then you say what I wish I had done, and you can do a do-over, and then you make a commitment. Hey, I'd like to do it this way in the future, and I'm going to work on it. Can we work on it together? Let's put up some signs around the house so I'll remember to do it, and to have some kind of a collaborative process where everybody's working on it together and feels like it's something that really we're all together in. So I think working with our kids that way continuously sets up patterns of resilience and repair that can last a lifetime. Really helpful stuff.
Yeah, I think, Vivek, I think you definitely, I mean, you said a lot there, a lot of good stuff, and it was, I'm not going to go into the, you know, apologizing thing, because I think you gave us some really good starting points, you know, for folks who might be struggling with that. I just wanted to add that, you know, not being afraid to seek outside help. You know, a lot of us, depending culturally, you know, how you have been taught or heard messages around therapy, counseling, all of those things. I mean, I see a therapist, so, you know, and my therapist is a shaman. So I think also, you know, we have to broaden how we define a therapist, right? Outside of colonial ways of thinking. And that, you know, while I know finances could also be an access issue, when we begin to also broaden how we think about therapy and who is considered a therapist and who's not, and within our own cultures, that also shifts monetarily how that can be accessed, right? Too. And I say that to say, like, yeah, I see a shaman who's just like, pay what you can, right? What can you afford? What can you afford, right? And I'm not saying everyone is like that. But I think we have such a very, you know, we live in and I'm saying we as an American society because that's where I live, very narrow, very myopic way of thinking about who's considered the right person to seek, you know, support, mental health and wellness support. So that has been helpful for me, to help me, you know, look deeper within my own womb and my womb, you know, trauma and my own inner child trauma. It's a lot of work, but that work is helping me be a better parent, right? And it helps me to acknowledge what my triggers are, and that my triggers are not my children's fault, right? Like, them triggering me because that's connected to something deep back to when I was 6 years old has nothing to do with them. They're not responsible for controlling that, but I am responsible and am capable of being able to control how I respond to those triggers in my life. So I think that when we as caregivers, adults who love children and support children in our learning spaces, this is not just for parents. You know, if you're working in an agile learning center or a traditional school, like if you ain't doing your own healing work, right? Like you're just gonna perpetuate, you know, traumas that you've experienced onto children, even if they don't look the same way it did for you as a child. It'll show up in different ways. So, and actually this month in our village, we have a healing and liberation counselor who's also Babalao, who's going to be coming in to provide support for our caregivers, because this has come up a lot with our caregivers in the village, right? Like conflict with like, not just how I'm, you know, dealing with my own triggers or disciplining in a different way, but also like I have a partner who's not on the same page with SDE and I don't know how to like resolve this, you know? So I'm excited about Anru coming in to, you know, meet with us to do that. And I say that to say that if you are in a, you know, have your own community, whether it's physical, virtual, both, and that is not part of your work, like, you know, this is a time that I hope you start to consider the healing piece of it. Like, this is the intersectionality of this is social justice work, right? Like, how are we being intentional in supporting the healing of the caregivers in our space? And this came up before our virtual community was created, because before that, we started with a physical cooperative. And what I observed in our cooperative, in our SDE co-op, is that as mostly BIPOC, majority BIPOC parents, I was recognizing, we were all saying like, yes, we want liberation. We want a liberated education, an education that's different from what we experience. Like we want a learning space that's free for our kids. And then we get together like, yeah, I don't like, what does this look like? How do I do this? I don't know how to shed some shit that I got to shed. It keeps coming back. And so I recognize like, oh man, we all need some healing and support. Right? And that was an opportunity for us to tap into our local healers in our community to bring in that support for us. So, so yeah, that's my 2 cents about that.
We have a few minutes left. Kelly, do you want to add anything on repair or anything else that you feel you want to leave us with?
Well, I can say, just speak to repair, just because that seems most appropriate. Unfortunately, I'm going to be a little underwhelming in that I don't, I never really feel comfortable telling, you know, other people like, this is the best way to go about X, Y, and Z, just because everything's different all the time, every moment, every day, right? Like, so we're constantly changing and we're all different, and what might feel appropriate for me might not work in someone else's contexts. But what does feel true for me here is that if one is interested in repair wholeheartly, right? They're not trying to be cynical with it, not trying to get around, but if somebody is actually interested in repair, or actually interested in any kind of improvement, you know, in relation to what we're discussing here in terms of social justice or equity, or however we want to term it. If it is something that is truly in your heart to do and it feels important for you to do, and you are going forward in your best way doing it, then you're repairing, because that's what it is. Every moment of every day that you are working to repair is repair. There's not going to be a point where you are saying, and I'm totally repaired today. Everything, as we've mentioned, we've heard different parts over what we're saying here. There are going to be times where you're like, oh, dang, I thought I was better here, but looks like I'm not. So I got to go back and do some work. And that's what it's going to be forever. You know, like this is what it is. This is what growth is. This is what evolution is. And so in the area of repair, we're constantly going to be working at it. There is definitely going to be a time where you're like, oh, okay, I handled that a little bit better than the past. But the only way to get there is to have like all of these steps in between. And it's just going to keep on going. So that would be what I would say. If your heart, you know, if you are wanting repair's coming. It's coming, and it's coming because every single day you're going to do it and maybe get it a little wrong and then get it right and then get it wrong and then get it right. And it's going to keep on getting better if your heart is wanting it to get better. Again, not to sound cliche. I know I sound a little bit like a Disney movie, but it's actually just like legit. Like that, this is the struggle. You are, and I see that coming in the chat. It's a little bit harder for me to follow the chat because it's stuff coming so fast. But if you're working at it every day and getting it wrong and trying to figure out and be messy, is how it, you know, this is the process. This is just it. It's going to be messy. We're going to be figuring out. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to be giving ideas, and something's going to sound a little bit wrong, but maybe a little bit right. And you're going to take. And so I think that the fact that there are people that are interested in that question and are really kind of saying it from their heart is hope enough. And you're going to do it.
Yes. Thank you so much. I can see in the chat, everything you all said is resonating so deeply with people. So just thank you again for being present and sharing everything you shared. There was a final question to please drop any social media website accounts where people can follow you or find your work. If you can put those in the chat or email me afterwards, I'll put them in our resource list that's going out to participants. So either way that works for you. I'm going to stop the recording